November 22nd marks a somber day in our nation's history. It was exactly 50 years ago that President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated while driving in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. It was a moment in time that few will ever forget, and the images of that day have been etched in the collective memory for generations. Our guest in the studio, Sergeant James Felder, author of the book I Buried John F. Kennedy, carried the casket of our slain president. Mr. Felder, thank you so much for being in the studio with us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, how did you get to be chosen to be a pallbearer?
The military has a seniority system. On the day of President Kennedy's assassination, I just happened to be the senior NCO for funerals at Arlington Cemetery. So there was never any discussion who was going to head the team because I was the senior person. That's how it happened.
How did you find out? Was it a phone call? Did your superior officer come to you?
I was only had 57 days left to do in the Army. I was out job hunting that Friday. Came out of the Department of Agriculture and saw these ladies gathered around a taxi and they were crying, so I went over to find out what was going on. The old cab driver said to me, very stoic, they shot the president. I said, what do you mean they shot the president? He's in Dallas today. That's right, that's where they shot him. Went home to Southeast Washington, walked in the door, the telephone was ringing. It was my first sergeant. He said, Sergeant Felder, you heard what happened to the president? I said, yes. He said, your leave has been canceled. You need to get out here, get your team together. You've got to go to Dallas to pick up the president's body. That's how it started for me.
What were the types of feelings and thoughts that were going through your head immediately?
Well, immediately, President Kennedy was the first president I had voted for. A person whom I had seen many occasions when I worked at the White House on details and so forth, and whom I admired. I had to get over that hurt first. So for a few minutes, tears welled up in my eyes, but then my military kicked in. And so I had to now begin to prepare for what was ahead of us for the next 4 days.
It must be an unbelievable memory.
It is, but it's seared in my mind, to look at the president's body, to watch the autopsy, to watch the embalming, because we had to be there. Our job was security for the body. Miss Kennedy would not let the body leave the hospital to go to the funeral home to be embalmed. She wanted everything to be done at the hospital.
Why did she not want him to leave the hospital, you think?
She'd had a terrible experience that day in Dallas, earlier that day, trying to get the body out of Parkland Hospital to get it on Air Force One to bring it back to Washington. Most states have laws that you cannot move a body, particularly if it's been a homicide. His was a homicide, until it's been embalmed and the coroner's issued a death certificate and all of that. They threatened to hold the body in Dallas. She refused to let that happen, and with the aid of some of Kennedy's men, they were able to get the body out of Bethesda Naval Hospital and get it onto Air Force One. And she didn't want to trust that body being out of her sight again. She was in the hospital the entire time all of this was going on.
And obviously, as we all know, having seen the very famous images, she kept her clothes on.
She kept the same blood-stained clothes on until the next morning, until we got the body in the White House, 5 o'clock that Saturday morning. She was still in that blood-stained pink outfit.
It's been said that she kept those clothes on to show
She wanted to show the world what they had done to her husband.
Did you have a chance to speak with her or be in a room and kind of witness any of her conversations?
Witness her conversation and witnessed when she cut a lock of hair from his head, and that was the last time the casket was open. After that, she decided it would not be an open casket. Her expression, and I heard her said this, she said when she viewed the body for the first time, she said, he looks so waxen. Well, the embalmers did a terrific job with what they had to work with. You got to remember the man's head, part of it was shot off, But they did a great job of restoring him. But she said, no, I'm not going to have an open casket service from this way. And so it was not open anymore after that.
Still protecting him, she was.
All the way, yes.
It's hard to imagine having to think of all these things while you're in the moment of crisis grief. Mm-hmm. She really seemed like she kept it together. Was that true?
She did. You would think that she had thought this through, the way she was issuing orders and demanding that this, well, I won't say demanding that has to be done.
It's incredible to me as you're describing, you kind of clicked into duty mode for your country. She sounds to me like you're describing she did the same sort of thing.
She did the same thing. I did not see a tear on her on the 4 different occasions that I saw her during that period of time. The major part of it was the burial in Arlington Cemetery. Now, most of his aides and what we call the Boston Mafia crowd, they wanted the body to go back to Boston for burial. And she said, no, I want it to be in Arlington Cemetery. And even the site that she chose was a forbidden site. She wanted the site right in front of the Custis Lee Mansion, which is at the very top of the hill in Arlington. And that nobodies were supposed to be buried there. That was sacred ground, so to speak. But he's buried there.
What was the mood like in that close proximity with those of you who are just intimately right there with the casket and involved in the burial? What was it like for you?
For 4 days, that body was never out of our sight. I got maybe 6 hours sleep from Friday until Monday when we buried him in Arlington Cemetery. When we picked the body up at Andrews Air Force Base, we had to take it to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where I witnessed the autopsy, where I witnessed the embalming, where I witnessed the changing of the caskets. The casket that he came up in from Dallas, the handle got broken on it, so we couldn't use that casket. So at midnight that Friday night, 3 of his aides had to go out and buy a new casket, which was heavier than the one from Dallas. We started off with a 6-man team. We ended up with 8 because of the weight of the casket. The Navy refused to do the embalming. They said, that's personal. We don't want to be responsible because you might not like the job we do, so you got to get your own embalmer. 2 blocks down the street from Bethesda Naval Hospital is Gawler's Funeral Home, one of Washington's old line funeral homes. They wanted to pick the body up and take it. We took the funeral, which would have been easy. She said no. So they had to send a team with the equipment to come to the hospital and embalm him there.
Now, I know that Mrs. Kennedy actually did a lot of reading and wanted to model the funeral procession much like Abraham Lincoln's.
That she did. She was stoic and planned it to the T, and everything went off just as she wanted it or asked for it to be.
And from what I've read about her, she was incredibly schooled in history, and I think she probably realized right away, this is a moment in history and it's got to be done correctly.
Yes. And we subscribed to that as well, so we did all kind of extra rehearsals and so forth to be sure we did it just right then, because we knew the world would be watching.
But as the first bitter pangs of our incredulous grief begins to pass, we must thank God that we were privileged, however briefly, to have had this great man for our president. For he has now taken his place among the great figures of world history.
just brought it into the rotunda now. And then it stayed there overnight. At first, it was only supposed to stay in the rotunda until 9 o'clock that night. We brought it in that morning. But the lines were so long, they stretched all the way to D.C. Stadium, which is like 25 blocks away from the Capitol, on the east side of the Capitol. So they kept the Capitol open all night that night. And when I came back by the next morning at 6 o'clock, it looked like the lines hadn't moved. People were standing 8 and 10 abreast all the way up East Capitol Street.
Exiting St. Matthews, were you close or around at the time that little John came out and saluted his father as he went by?
Yes, as we came out of St. Matthew's Cathedral, this is Monday now, this is Monday afternoon, the services are over. We came out, and what we do is flip the flag at the front of the casket. When we flipped that flag, he was over to my left, and he did that salute, and I mean, it just jerked a tear almost. To watch him, a 3-year-old, he was only 3 at that time, and this was his birthday, But here he's at a funeral, but he did that salute, and seemed like the world just stopped for a moment.
Do you think you realized when you saw that that's the moment, that's the one everyone's going to remember?
I kind of thought that. I didn't know where the cameras were and how they were going to catch it, but the still cameras, the shots really got him.
Was it hard for you to keep it together?
It was. At this moment, the priest is giving it the final blessing there before we put it on the catafalque. So right now, we're just waiting to take our next step after he moves away. Now we got to get it up on the catafalque, on the caisson for the march to Arlington. Yeah. That was testing. If you notice there, our knees are buckling. It's heavy. We're tired. And we're going up this hill, and the clergy, they're moving very slow. And with each step, the casket was literally pulling us down into the ground.
Wow.
Finally, we moved up to nudge the last priest there and said, listen, can you speed this up? This casket is getting heavy. And they speeded up a little bit, and so we finally got to gravesite, but we were spent by that time.
Okay, here's a toughie. This, I'm assuming, is laying the casket.
Yes, we're putting the casket on the lowering device. We had a problem because normally you got to carry the casket first. We're supposed to carry it straight on, but there's this eternal flame there. So we could not carry it straight, so we had to go up and then what we call back it in.
Black Watch ceremony at Arlington. Now, you mentioned that this was important to Mrs. Kennedy, who you
right.
can see here in the picture.
These are Irish, this is the Irish Black Watch. They're from Ireland. And she wanted them to be there because of the Ireland connection between the Kennedys, the Irish connection between the Kennedys and Ireland. So she requested that they be there for the graveside service. Air Force One and 99 other jets flew over that day. The Air Force One came after that flyover and tipped its wings and kept on going.
Cardinal Cushing blessing the body.
Right. Cushing was the family priest. He'd been with the Kennedys through the years. He'd witnessed all the tragedies that the family had gone through, all the losses. And I really felt for him that day, because here was something I know he did not expect that he would have to do, given all the other things that had happened to the Kennedys. But here he was burying John Kennedy, one of his favorites, yeah. So he does the last blessing there before we fold the flag.
So this is the man that likely baptized the children?
He did. He baptized the children. He married them. He was at all of the funerals of the other Kennedys who had died. You know.
With all the saints, through Christ our Lord. Amen.
What was that moment like for you, watching the casket go into the ground, knowing that's the last time you'll see it, and what a monumental time and moment that is for our country?
After we got back to the barracks, then we just sort of stood around and looked at each other, didn't say anything. There wasn't a word said by anybody. And I think the silence spelled it all out. We had buried our commander-in-chief.